The moment I saw them under my bedsheet, something inside me went very, very quiet. That's the part people never talk about, the silence. Not the screaming, not the breaking of plates, not the crying. Just the silence that comes when your world collapses, and you realize there are no words left that can make sense of what you're seeing. It was a Thursday night. The lights were off in our bedroom, except for the dim orange glow from the street lamp slipping through the curtains. I had come home earlier than expected. The catering order at the restaurant had been cancelled, so my shift ended before midnight. I remember walking in quietly, trying not to wake my husband, Ethan. But when I opened the door to our room, my body froze. There was movement beneath the blanket, slow, rhythmic, unmistakable. And when I switched on the lamp, it wasn't just Ethan's face that turned toward me. It was hers. My sister-in-law. Lydia. Ethan's only sister. The woman who used to call me her best friend. If you had told me years ago that Lydia would destroy my marriage, I would have laughed. We were inseparable, the kind of sisters-in-law people envied. When I married Ethan 8 years ago, Lydia was one of the first people to welcome me into the family. She was vibrant, always laughing, the life of every gathering. Ethan adored her, but it didn't bother me then. I thought that was how brothers were supposed to be. Ethan came from a close family. His parents lived just a few streets away, and every Sunday, we'd gather there for dinner. Lydia would bring her famous cinnamon rolls, and I'd bring my lemon bars. She used to say, "We make the perfect dessert team, Maya, you and me." We'd stay up late after everyone went home, drinking tea in my kitchen, talking about everything from work to love to dreams we didn't dare say out loud. She told me once she didn't believe in marriage, that men were too selfish to truly love. I had laughed at her back then, teasing her that she just hadn't met the right one. If only I had known how deeply those words hid her truth. Ethan was a chef, charming, warm, and meticulous. He ran his own small restaurant in town, and I worked part-time there after our daughter was born. Life was ordinary in the best way, morning routines, shared breakfasts, giggling over burnt pancakes. We had our ups and downs, but I believed we were happy. Lydia would drop by often, too often, maybe, looking back now. She said she came to help, especially after my C-section when I couldn't move much. She'd cook for us, clean the kitchen, even rock our baby to sleep. Ethan always praised her. "You're lucky to have Lydia around," he'd tell me. "She's got a good heart, Maya." And I'd nod, smiling, because I believed it too. For years, I thought we were a family bound by love. I never realized we were a story waiting to shatter. The first time I noticed something strange, it was so small that I almost brushed it off. Lydia had come over one Saturday when I was folding laundry in the living room. Ethan was in the kitchen cooking, his favorite thing to do on weekends. Lydia leaned over to help me fold the sheets, and I caught a whiff of Ethan's cologne on her clothes. It was subtle but familiar. I laughed it off at first. Maybe she hugged him when she came in, I thought. Families do that. But then I noticed she started visiting even when I wasn't home. I'd return from errands to find her car parked outside. Ethan would say, "Oh, she just stopped by to borrow a recipe," or, "We were testing a new dish for the restaurant." I wanted to believe him. I did believe him. Until one day, our daughter, 5 at the time, said something that made my stomach twist. She was coloring in her room when she looked up and said, "Mommy, Aunt Lydia sleeps in your bed when you're not here." I froze. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "She and Daddy watch movies in your room. They laugh a lot." My mind started spinning. Maybe it was innocent. Maybe she misunderstood. Maybe. But something in me shifted that day. Something quiet and watchful. I started noticing the small things. Lydia's perfume on Ethan's jacket. Text messages he'd quickly delete. Her lipstick in the car's cup holder. Still, I told myself, no, it can't be. Lydia was like my sister. She'd cried with me when my father passed. She'd held my hand through childbirth. She'd been there, always there. But now, I wondered what there really meant. Ethan's behavior began to change too. He grew impatient. Short-tempered. Little arguments flared into shouting matches. "Why are you so paranoid lately?" he snapped once when I asked about his late nights. "Not everything's about you, Maya. Some of us actually work hard." The words cut deep. Ethan had never spoken to me like that before. I wanted to tell someone, but who could I trust? His parents adored Lydia. My own mother lived miles away and wasn't the kind of woman who believed in marital problems. So I kept quiet. And the silence grew heavy between us, thick like fog, suffocating every room we shared. Then came that Thursday night. I wasn't supposed to come home early. Ethan thought I'd be at the restaurant till 2 a.m. He'd told me not to wait up, that he'd catch up on paperwork at home. When I turned the key in the lock and stepped into the dark house, I noticed something strange: music, faint and low, coming from upstairs. Our bedroom. I remember thinking how odd it was. Ethan hated background noise when he worked. I climbed the stairs slowly, the creak of each step sounding louder than it should have. And then I saw it. The half-open door. The tangled sheets. Two shadows moving in rhythm. When I switched on the light, it felt like time stopped. Ethan's face, pale, panicked. Lydia's, frozen, her hand clutching the blanket to her chest. Neither spoke. And I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just stood there, feeling something deep inside me die, not loudly, but quietly, like a candle being snuffed out. For a moment, all I could hear was the sound of my own breathing. The air felt thick, like the walls themselves were holding their breath with me. Ethan stumbled out of bed, half covered in the blanket, eyes wide like a cornered animal. Lydia clutched the sheet to her chest, shaking, mumbling something that didn't even sound like words. I remember whispering, barely able to form the sentence. "Tell me I'm not seeing this." Ethan's mouth opened, then closed again. He looked at Lydia, then at me. The silence stretched like a knife being pulled slowly across my skin. And then, he said it. "Maya, it's not what it looks like." I laughed, actually laughed. A hollow, broken sound that echoed through the room. "Not what it looks like?" I whispered. "You're naked, Ethan. With your sister." That word, sister, cracked something in the air. Lydia started crying. She wrapped the blanket tighter around herself, sobbing into her hands. "Maya, please, please let me explain." But I couldn't hear her. My heart was pounding so loudly it drowned out everything else. I turned away and walked out of the room before I said something I couldn't take back. Downstairs, the house looked different, foreign, almost. The family pictures on the wall, the scent of cinnamon from Lydia's baking that still lingered in the kitchen, everything felt tainted. I sat at the kitchen table and stared at my wedding ring. My hands were trembling, but my mind was eerily calm, like I'd stepped outside of my own body. A few minutes later, I heard Ethan's footsteps behind me. He was dressed now, hair still disheveled, voice shaky. "Maya, it was a mistake. It just happened." I didn't look up. "A mistake? You mistakenly ended up in bed with your sister?" He flinched. "We were drinking. It got out of hand. Please, you have to understand." I cut him off. "Understand what? That you broke every line a man can cross?" He reached for my arm, but I pulled away. The touch made my skin crawl. I could smell Lydia's perfume on him, that same floral scent she'd worn at our wedding. I stood up, staring him dead in the eye. "You two deserve each other." And with that, I walked upstairs, packed a small bag, and took our daughter to my mother's house. I didn't say a word to Lydia when I passed her in the hall. She was crying, whispering apologies that sounded like lies wrapped in guilt. That night, I didn't sleep. I watched my daughter breathing beside me, innocent and safe, while I tried to make sense of how everything had fallen apart. The next morning, Ethan called. Then again. And again. He left messages, crying, pleading, saying he'd made a horrible mistake, that Lydia had been going through things and he was trying to comfort her. I deleted every message without listening to the end. But something in his words bothered me, the way he said going through things. What did that even mean? Over the next few days, I couldn't stop replaying every moment in my head. Every Sunday dinner. Every shared laugh. Every time Lydia told me Ethan was lucky to have me. Was it guilt in her eyes all along? Or had I just been too blind to see it? A week later, I decided to go back home, not to forgive, but to understand. The house was quiet when I arrived. Ethan wasn't there, but Lydia's car was in the driveway. I almost turned around, but something made me go inside. She was in the kitchen, making coffee, like nothing had happened. When she saw me, her face went pale. "Maya. I didn't think you'd come." "I wouldn't have," I said softly, "but I need to hear it. From you." "Why?" She sat down, staring into her mug. For a long time, she didn't speak. Then, her voice cracked. "I didn't plan it. I swear, I didn't. It started after Mom died. Ethan and I were both lonely, we drank one night, we cried, and..." Her words blurred after that. I could hear her talking, but my mind was somewhere else, back to all the nights she'd hugged me, called me sis, told me she'd never let anyone hurt me. When she finally stopped, I said, "You could have chosen anyone. But you chose him, my husband." Tears streamed down her face. "I know. I hate myself every day." "Good," I said quietly. "Because I can't hate you enough for both of us." And then I left again, not out of rage, but because I realized something: they didn't deserve to see me break. Days turned into weeks. Ethan tried to visit. He sent letters, begged me to come home. He even went to my mother's house once, but I refused to see him. I needed time to think, time to breathe. It's strange how silence can both heal and hurt. At first, it felt unbearable. Every night, I'd lie awake wondering if I'd done something wrong. Did I miss the signs? Was I not enough? But slowly, I started noticing something else: peace. The kind that comes when the chaos stops, even if it leaves emptiness behind. Still, a part of me couldn't rest without knowing one thing. Was it really just once? Because the way they looked at each other that night, it didn't feel new. So, one evening, I went back to the house when I knew Ethan would be at work. I searched through the drawers, his phone bills, his emails. I wasn't proud of it, but I needed the truth. And I found it. A series of messages. Hidden under a fake contact name. Dates. Photos. Plans. It had been going on for months. My knees gave out, and I sank to the floor, clutching the phone to my chest. They'd been meeting in hotels. In my home. Even when I'd been in the hospital after my surgery, when Lydia said she was taking care of Ethan. My whole marriage had been a stage play, and I was the only one who didn't know the script. That night, I didn't cry. I just sat there, surrounded by the ruins of my old life, thinking about the woman I used to be. The woman who believed love could fix anything. She was gone now. In her place stood someone quieter, sharper, and far less forgiving. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat at the kitchen table with the phone in front of me, staring at those messages, every "I miss you," every "I can't stop thinking about last night." Each word was like a small blade pressed against my skin. Morning light crept through the window, spilling across the floor, touching the phone like it too wanted to see the truth. That's when I decided, if they had built their world on lies, I was going to show it to them, in the light of day, where everyone could see. But not in anger. No screaming. No violence. Just truth. Because truth has a way of burning cleaner than revenge ever could. The next few days, I pretended to disappear. I didn't answer calls, didn't post online, didn't go back to my mother's. Ethan thought I was gone for good. But quietly, I was preparing. I printed the messages, the photos, the emails. I even saved a few voice notes, Lydia whispering "I love you" into the phone. My hands shook the entire time, but I kept going. There was one message that broke me completely. It was dated 3 weeks before that night. Lydia had texted Ethan. "Do you ever wish she'd just leave you? Then we could stop hiding." And he'd replied, "Don't say that. She's still my wife. I just don't love her the same anymore." I remember reading those lines over and over until the words blurred. He didn't love me anymore. And the worst part was, he didn't even have the courage to say it out loud. That weekend was his mother's birthday, a big family gathering he'd been planning for months. I knew Lydia would be there. I also knew Ethan would try to act normal, like nothing had happened. So I decided that's when the truth would come out. I didn't want to humiliate them for the sake of cruelty, but I needed everyone to see what kind of betrayal had been sitting quietly in their living room all along. When I arrived that afternoon, the house was full of laughter. Balloons tied to chairs, the smell of roast beef and vanilla cake. Ethan froze when he saw me. Lydia's face drained of color. "Hi, everyone," I said softly, forcing a smile. "Sorry I'm late." His mother hugged me like nothing was wrong. She was glowing, surrounded by family, proud of her children. My heart ached for her, she didn't deserve this pain either. Dinner went on quietly, awkwardly. Ethan kept glancing at me, Lydia avoided my eyes. But I stayed calm. I cut my food. I smiled when someone told a joke. I waited. When the plates were cleared, I stood up. My heart was steady, my hands firm. "I have something to share," I said. Everyone turned to look at me. Lydia's fork froze halfway to her mouth. I reached into my bag and placed the printed papers on the table. "I found something," I said softly, "and I think the family deserves to know what's been happening behind closed doors." Ethan's face went pale. "Maya, please," he whispered. "Don't do this here." I ignored him. I picked up one of the pages and began to read, his words to Lydia. The ones about not loving me. The ones about wishing I'd leave. A gasp rippled through the room. His mother covered her mouth, tears spilling before she could stop them. And Lydia, she broke. She slid out of her chair, sobbing, whispering apologies that meant nothing now. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I just stood there, feeling the weight lift off my chest. The truth was finally out. Ethan tried to grab my arm, voice trembling. "You're ruining everything, Maya." I looked him straight in the eye. "No, Ethan. You ruined it the night you brought her into our bed." The room went silent. His father stood, shaking his head, his voice low and cold. "Get out. Both of you." And that was it. Just like that, the family they'd hidden behind turned its back on them. I left quietly, without looking back. I could hear Lydia crying in the distance, her mother shouting, plates clattering, the sound of a family crumbling under truth. Outside, the evening sky was turning orange, and the air smelled like rain. For the first time in months, I felt something close to peace. The following days were strange. Word spread fast, small towns are like that. Whispers followed me everywhere I went, in the grocery store, at the cafe, even at the school drop-off. Some people pitied me. Some pretended not to know. But I didn't care. Because shame only clings to secrets, and I didn't have any left. Ethan moved out of town soon after. Lydia vanished for a while, staying with some distant relatives. His parents reached out to me a few weeks later. They apologized, over and over, saying they had no idea. His mother cried when she told me she'd always thought Lydia envied our marriage, but she never imagined it could go this far. I didn't hold it against her. Some wounds aren't anyone's fault but the ones who caused them. Months passed. I focused on my daughter, on rebuilding my life piece by piece. It wasn't easy, the nights were long, and loneliness had a way of creeping in when the house got too quiet. But in that quiet, I found something else, clarity. I realized that betrayal doesn't just destroy love, it reveals it. It shows you who was real, who was pretending, and who you truly are when everything's stripped away. One evening, I received a letter in the mail. No return address. I almost threw it away, but something about the handwriting made me pause. It was Lydia's. Inside was a single page. Her words were shaky, almost unreadable. Maya, I'm sorry. I don't expect forgiveness. I've left town. I can't face anyone. I just wanted you to know, it wasn't love. It was weakness. And I hate myself for it every day. I folded the letter carefully, placed it in my drawer, and never replied. Forgiveness, I realized, doesn't always need to be spoken. Sometimes it's just choosing not to carry their shame anymore. That night, I stood by the window, watching the rain fall against the glass. My daughter slept in her room down the hall, her soft breathing the only sound in the house. And I whispered to myself, "We're okay now. We're finally okay." After that day, my life split in two. Before the betrayal, and after. Before, my mornings began with coffee shared across the kitchen table, laughter, and Ethan's half-sung hums from the shower. After, they began in silence, the kind that felt both heavy and sacred. But silence, I learned, can be a seed for new beginnings. At first, I avoided everything that reminded me of them, the restaurant, our old friends, even the street we used to live on. But one afternoon, I found myself driving past it anyway. The windows were dark, the curtains drawn, a for sale sign stuck crookedly in the yard. I parked across the street, and for a long time, I just sat there, watching the wind move the curtains. That house had been full of laughter once. It had held birthday candles, bedtime stories, the smell of Sunday pancakes. Now it was just walls and emptiness, like a shell after the tide pulls back. I realized something then. I didn't want that house anymore. I didn't want anything that belonged to that version of me, the one who trusted too easily, loved without boundaries, and mistook silence for peace. A few weeks later, I started working full-time at a nearby catering company. It wasn't glamorous, but it was something of my own. My coworkers didn't know my story, at least not at first, and that was a kind of freedom. In between slicing vegetables and icing cakes, I began to feel my hands steady again. Work became my therapy. The smell of fresh bread, the sound of knives against chopping boards, the chatter in the kitchen, it brought me back to myself. One afternoon, while setting up for a wedding, I overheard two women whispering behind me. "Isn't that her? The one whose husband, you know?" I froze for a moment. The words stung, but I kept arranging the dessert table. They went quiet when I turned around, embarrassed. Later that night, I realized something important. Gossip doesn't define you, it only defines those who need it to feel better about their own lives. So I stopped hiding. When people asked, I didn't sugarcoat it anymore. I'd simply say, yes, that was me. But I'm not that story anymore. And every time I said it, I felt stronger. A few months later, Ethan showed up at my work. It was a hot afternoon. I remember the sunlight catching the dust in the air, the hum of the industrial fridge in the background. He looked thinner, tired, like a man carrying the weight of his own choices. I hadn't seen him since that night. He waited outside until I came out for my break. "Maya," he said quietly, "you look well." I nodded, arms crossed. "What do you want, Ethan?" He hesitated, then sighed. "I wanted to apologize. Not for you to forgive me, I know that's too much, but to tell you that I'm sorry. Truly." I studied him for a long time. His face, once so familiar, now looked like a stranger's. "Why?" I asked softly. "Why her?" He looked down. "Because she was easy. Because I felt small, and she made me feel needed. But it was wrong, Maya. Every second of it was wrong. I wanted to feel anger, but all I felt was exhaustion." "You didn't just break my trust," I said. "You broke the very idea of home for our daughter." He nodded, tears welling up. I know. And I'll never stop regretting it. We stood there in silence, two people staring at the ruins of something they'd once built together. Then I said, "You should go." And he did. That was the last time I ever saw him. Lydia never returned to town. I heard through a mutual friend that she'd moved to another state, working at a small bakery. Sometimes I wondered if she ever looked in the mirror and saw what she'd done, not to me, but to herself. Because betrayal doesn't just destroy others, it corrodes the one who carries it. Over time, I began to heal. Not all at once, healing isn't dramatic like the movies. It's quiet, slow, like a scar forming beneath your skin. I learned to enjoy little things again, morning walks with my daughter, books before bed, the taste of freshly brewed tea in a clean kitchen. And sometimes, I caught myself laughing again, really laughing. One afternoon, nearly a year later, I received a call from Ethan's mother. She sounded hesitant. "Maya, I know I have no right to ask, but would you consider coming over? We're having a small family dinner. It's been a difficult year." At first, I wanted to say no. But something in her voice softened me. She had been caught in the middle of something she didn't create, yet she'd lost a son and a daughter to it. So I went. When I arrived, she hugged me tightly, crying softly into my shoulder. "I'm so sorry, my dear. I failed you. I should have seen it." I pulled back and smiled gently. "You didn't fail me. They failed themselves." We sat together that evening, sharing food and quiet conversation. For the first time in a long while, the house didn't feel haunted. Her husband raised a glass midway through the meal. "To truth," he said, "and to those who survive it." I lifted my glass too, water, not wine, and said softly, "To peace." That night, when I got home, I tucked my daughter into bed. She looked up at me sleepily and whispered, "Mommy, are we happy now?" I brushed her hair back and kissed her forehead. "Yes, sweetheart. We are." And for once, I meant it. Life doesn't always give closure in the way we expect. Sometimes it doesn't give any at all. But I'd learned something: closure isn't what happens when they apologize. It's what happens when you decide you've suffered enough. I wasn't the betrayed wife anymore. I was a woman who had walked through fire, and come out carrying her own light. In a small town, secrets travel faster than light. And when the secret is this big, a husband and his own sister, it doesn't just whisper through gossip. It roars. For months, I felt the echo of that roar everywhere I went. At the grocery store, women would stop mid-conversation when I walked past. At the salon, I could hear my name slip into murmurs behind hands. "Maya," they'd say, "the one whose husband slept with his sister." They said it like it was a movie they couldn't stop watching, as if my pain was their entertainment. At first, I avoided everyone. I'd pick odd hours to shop, use delivery services for work supplies, anything to avoid their pitying eyes. But eventually, I realized, if I kept hiding, I'd be letting their version of the story live louder than my truth. So I stopped running. One morning, I decided to go to the local farmer's market, the same one Ethan and I used to visit every Sunday. I hadn't been there since everything happened. When I arrived, people turned to look, just like I expected. Some smiled awkwardly, others pretended not to see me. I smiled anyway. I bought apples from Mrs. Green. She'd known Ethan since he was a boy. She hesitated before taking my money. "Maya, dear. I'm sorry about everything." I nodded. "Thank you, Mrs. Green. It's behind me now." She smiled weakly, her eyes softening with something that felt like respect. And that's when I realized something. Pity fades, but dignity lasts. From that day on, I walked with my head higher. When people stared, I met their gaze. When they whispered, I smiled. Because I wasn't a scandal. I was a survivor. As months passed, the story started to shift. People began to admire how I'd handled it, quietly, without revenge or chaos. A woman from church pulled me aside one Sunday after service. I just wanted to say, she whispered, you gave me strength. I left my husband last month. He was unfaithful, too. Watching how you carried yourself, it made me believe I could survive it. Her words settled deep in my chest. For the first time, I saw something good come from all that pain. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about every woman who'd been lied to, humiliated, or made to feel small, and chose to stand tall anyway. I decided to start something small, a support circle at the community center. We called it Second Chances. The first meeting, only 3 women showed up. The next week, 7. By the third month, we had over 20 women sitting in a circle, drinking tea, sharing stories that had lived in their throats for years. We laughed. We cried. We healed, together. It was in that little room, surrounded by strangers who'd become sisters, that I realized my purpose had quietly changed. I wasn't just surviving betrayal anymore. I was teaching others how to reclaim their lives after it. And the funny thing about small towns? They love redemption almost as much as they love gossip. Soon, the same people who had once whispered about me were asking me to speak at women's events, fundraisers, and local schools. I wasn't sure what to say at first. But every time I stood before an audience, I spoke from the same truth. You can't control what people do to you. But you can control what you become because of it. Each time I said it, I felt lighter. One afternoon, I received a message from an unknown number. When I opened it, my breath caught. It was from Lydia. I saw your name in an article. They said you help women rebuild after betrayal. You're doing good things, Maya. I'm proud of you, even if I have no right to be. I stared at the screen for a long time before typing a reply. I wish you healing, Lydia. Truly. But our stories are no longer the same. And that was it. No bitterness, no anger. Just truth. It felt like closing a door gently, not slamming it, not locking it, just knowing I'd never have to walk through it again. About a year later, I was invited to speak at a conference in another city, a larger one, with hundreds of attendees. As I stood on that stage, looking out at the sea of faces, I thought about how far I'd come. From the night I found them in my bed, to this moment, standing tall, calm, steady. When I finished my talk, people stood and clapped. But the loudest sound, for me, was the quiet voice inside whispering. You made it, Maya. You made it. The next morning, while packing my bag, I looked at my reflection in the hotel mirror. There were lines around my eyes now, not from age, but from growth. And for the first time, I liked what I saw. Because that woman looking back wasn't defined by betrayal. She was defined by what she did after it. When I returned home, my daughter met me at the door, waving a drawing she'd made at school. It showed the 2 of us, hand in hand, standing under a bright sun. At the bottom, she'd written in uneven letters. My mommy is brave. I pulled her into my arms and whispered. So are you, baby. So are you. That night, after she'd gone to bed, I stepped outside into the quiet. The air was cool, the stars scattered across the sky like tiny reminders of light after darkness. And I thought about Lydia, wherever she was. About Ethan, whatever shadow of guilt he still carried. I didn't hate them anymore. I didn't love them either. What I felt was something pure, release. Because letting go isn't saying what they did was okay. It's saying they no longer have the power to define your story. And that realization. That was my freedom. Healing doesn't happen all at once. It comes quietly, like dawn light slipping through a half-closed curtain. You don't even realize it's there until you feel its warmth on your face. That's how it happened for me. For months, I kept expecting the pain to come back, some sudden wave of grief, anger, or regret. But it never did. The pain didn't vanish overnight. It just softened. It stopped living at the center of me. I filled my days differently now. Mornings began with coffee and quiet, no phone buzzing, no tension in the air. I'd open the windows, let the sunlight spill across the kitchen counter, and listened to the world breathe. Sometimes my daughter, Emma, would run into the kitchen wearing her school uniform, her hair still half-tied. "Mom, you forgot my lunch." And I'd laugh, realizing I'd been lost in thought again. We'd pack her sandwich together, and she'd say, "You smile more now." I'd ruffle her hair and whisper, "That's because my heart's lighter." Work was different too. I took on projects I cared about, not just the ones that paid well. I started collaborating with other women from the Second Chances circle. We built small initiatives, free counseling sessions, workshops about financial independence, and even a little booklet we called Starting Over. Each time I watched someone rediscover herself, that first real laugh after months of tears, I felt a quiet pride bloom inside me. There's something sacred about watching another woman rise. Because when she does, it feels like a piece of you stands taller, too. One afternoon, about a year after it all began, I received a letter, yes, a real one, with my name written in careful, slanted handwriting. No return address. Inside was a short note. "I'm getting help, Maya. I'm sorry for everything. I wish you peace, Lydia." No explanations. No excuses. Just that. I sat for a long time holding that piece of paper, running my fingers over the ink. And then, quietly, I forgave her. Not for her sake, for mine. Because carrying anger is like holding a burning coal and expecting the other person to feel the heat. When I let go of it, I could finally breathe freely again. Later that evening, Emma and I went to the beach, something we hadn't done since before the betrayal. The sky was painted in gold and lavender, the waves gentle and endless. She ran ahead of me, her laughter echoing against the sea breeze. And I stood there watching her, the tiny figure of innocence and new beginnings, and I thought, maybe this is what grace looks like. Not revenge. Not justice shouted loud. But quiet, peaceful endurance, the kind that lets you stand in the same world that once broke you and smile anyway. I started writing, too, not for anyone else, but for me. Late at night, after Emma was asleep, I'd sit by the lamp and write little reflections about the day, about lessons I was learning. Soon, those notes turned into short essays. Then, one of the local magazines asked if they could publish them as a weekly column. They titled it, Letters from the Quiet Side. Each week, I wrote about healing, forgiveness, betrayal, and growth, stories of women who'd been through storms and still learned to dance in the rain. And every time someone wrote back saying, "Your story sounds like mine," I knew I was doing something right. Because pain, when shared with purpose, becomes power. One evening, while Emma and I were setting the table for dinner, she asked something that stopped me cold. "Mom, do you miss Dad?" I looked at her, really looked at her. She wasn't angry. She wasn't confused. She just wanted to understand. I took a deep breath and said, "Sometimes I miss who I thought he was. But not who he really was." She nodded slowly, processing it. "Does that mean you still love him?" I smiled gently. "It means I love myself more now." She grinned, proud of that answer, and went back to folding napkins. And in that moment, I felt something settle inside me, like a puzzle piece finding its place. Years later, when people in town spoke about me, they didn't mention Ethan or Lydia anymore. They talked about second chances. About the columns. About the women I'd helped. The scandal that once defined me had turned into the story of how I rebuilt. And that, to me, was victory. Sometimes, late at night, I still think about that night, the night I opened the door and found my whole world collapsing in front of me. But now, instead of pain, I feel gratitude. Because that night broke me open, and in that breaking, I found who I was meant to be. Life didn't give me the ending I expected. But it gave me something better, truth, peace, and the strength to begin again. So if you ever find yourself standing in the ruins of what was once your life, wondering how you'll go on, remember this. You already are. Every breath you take after heartbreak is an act of courage. Every small smile, every morning you get up and keep going, that's healing. And one day, without even realizing it, you'll wake up and the ache will be gone. And you'll look around and see, you built a new life out of the pieces. One you actually chose. Sometimes, betrayal doesn't end your story. It begins it. For a long time, I thought that night, the night I found my husband and his sister in our bed, was the moment my life ended. But now I see it differently. It was the night truth finally walked into my home, uninvited but necessary. Truth hurts when it first arrives. It tears apart illusions you once held sacred. But when the dust settles, truth also frees you. It freed me. I used to think forgiveness meant letting them off the hook, that it was a gift I'd be forced to give them. But I learned something deeper. Forgiveness isn't for the people who broke you. It's for the part of yourself that deserves peace. And peace doesn't come from revenge. It comes from reclaiming your story, from standing tall and saying, yes, I was hurt. But I am still here. Because in the end, that's what strength really is, not pretending you were never broken, but showing the world how beautifully you healed. If my story has taught me anything, it's this. Family doesn't always mean blood. Sometimes, family are the people who help you stand when your knees are shaking, the ones who see your scars and call them proof of survival, not shame. And maybe, just maybe, the most powerful revenge isn't exposing their sin, but living so well that it no longer defines you. So tell me, if you were in my place, if the person you trusted most betrayed you with someone you called family, would you have chosen to forgive? Or to fight back? Tell me in the comments below. And if my story touched your heart tonight, remember, there's a full version on the channel. Come join me there, and let's keep finding strength in our stories. Because every scar has a voice. And every voice deserves to be heard.